Number 5. The Jetway 707. The fascinating new Oldsmobile Toronado served as the foundation for Waldo Cotner and Robert Bevington's startup business, American Quality Coach. They started the new venture after Divco Wayne bought their previous business, Cotner Bevington, in 1964. Starting in 1965, the men put their focus on building the Oldsmobile 98 chassis. Soon after the Toronado debuted in 1966, Cotner and Bevington created a wide selection of specialized vehicles like ambulances, limousines, and hearses based on its front-wheel drive chassis. It didn't work out the way they had intended, though, when they tried to get funds for a prototype from their parent company, Miller Meteor. They were told they could not move forward with the intended project. The pristine status of the Miller Meteor Company was thought to be harmed by basing important cars on flashy Toronados. It was risky, especially since Divco Wayne had recently purchased Cotner Bevington as a more affordable alternative to their well-liked Cadillac coaches. Because at this point they were just stockholders, they didn't have much of a voice in the company. As a result, American Quality Coach was born. The first product from American Quality Coach was the Jetway 707, which was designed as an airport limousine. It had 8 doors, was 28 feet long, had a wheelbase of 185 inches, could seat 12 to 15 people, and was the first stretch limousine with dual rear axles. The Jetway 707 had a distinctive elevated roof in the form of a Vista Cruiser, built-in skylights, and a fully enclosed cargo room with a hinged back door. It was quite the sight. Unfortunately, all of their capital was invested in the equipment for their airport limos, and when the first line failed to sell, the company was forced to give up on the other coaches. A whole line of AQC hearses, ambulances, combination vehicles, and limousines were originally planned but abandoned. A current owner estimates that 52 Jetways were built between 1968 and 1970, but it's believed the number is as high as 150, according to professional car historian Bernie DeWinter. All coaches were built on 1968 Toronado chassis after this point, despite being advertised as 1970 vehicles. Just 2 years after it started, in 1970, AQC finally ran out of money and shut down after filing for bankruptcy. It's unclear exactly how many 707s are still in existence. According to widespread consensus, there aren't many. It was said that the 707 rusted quickly and was built with low-quality material. There is a brief summary of the Jetway 707 sales in 2015 online. One of them was listed for $20,000 on a Manitoba, Canada classified website, while another was sold for $3,000 on eBay. A blue and white 707 even sat in the weeds until it was sold for $7,000. What's your favorite antique car? Let us know in the comments and subscribe while you're down there. Number 4. Concrete ships. 9 sunken concrete ships can be seen in the Kiptopke State Park, which is close to the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. The ships were built during World War II and scuttled to guard a now-closed ferry port. They've since evolved into tourist attractions and temporary habitats for many animal species. Concrete ships were first proposed in the 19th century, but it wasn't until the First World War that the United States government began to take a real interest in the idea. President Woodrow Wilson gave the go-ahead to build 24 ships throughout the war. There were only 12 delivered, and none of them were actually put to use. When the U.S. Maritime Commission was tasked to provide a fleet of 24 more vessels during World War II, interest in the concept was renewed. The warships were constructed in Tampa, Florida, where McCloskey and Company started building after receiving a contract in July of 1943. Steel was in great demand during the conflict, but concrete was cheap and readily available. The ships were built using ferrocement. Not only did this prevent the hull from splitting, but it also made it possible for McCloskey and Company to finish their quota in a short amount of time, 1 ship each month. Only 2 of the 24 concrete ships were used in Europe. As part of the D-Day fleet, the SS David O. Sailor and Vitruvius were sunk 1,000 yards off Normandy shore to serve as an artificial breakwater. As a result, local waterways were calmer, enabling smaller landing boats to transport extra soldiers. The SS Arthur Newell Talbot, Edwin Thatcher, William A. Pollard, William Foster Cowham, Robert Whitman Leslie, John Grant, Willis A. Slater, Leonard Chase Wason, and Richard Kidder Meade were among the 9 concrete ships sent to Kiptopeke Beach in 1948 to act as a barrier for the Little Creek Cape Charles Ferry Terminal. In order to shield the region from bad weather, the ships were destroyed and partially buried in the Chesapeake Bay. The Bay Bridge Tunnel became operational in 1964, a little less than 20 years after the original bridge's opening, giving locals a convenient way to cross the water's mouth. It was decided to keep the ships in place, and the ferry port was closed not long after. The scuttled concrete ships in the Chesapeake Bay are still partially submerged, despite the ferry terminal getting closed down. They not only continue to protect the coastline, but have also turned into a haven for countless bird and marine species. The concrete vessels are not without risks, though, despite being home to many animal species. Officials from the park have put up posters warning people to keep at least 50 feet away from the ships because of exposed rebar that has made the area dangerous. Number 3. Douglas C-117. Solamander Beach, a black sand coast in Iceland, contains a strange plane crash that has gained notoriety. The popularity grew partly as a result of multiple pictures circulating online. Every year, this beach is visited by thousands of tourists. The location has served as the backdrop for a movie, television ads, and even music videos. The light plane stands in sharp contrast to both the dark sand and the amazing northern lights that frequently waltz across the distant sky. From Hofen in Iceland, the Douglas C-117 was flying back to Keflavik. An American radar station in Stocknesses had just gotten equipment from it. The facts surrounding what happened during the flight aren't fully known, and every source seems to present a different version of events. Some claim that the weather played a major role, while others think that ice developing on the wings was the cause of the crash. But it seems like a reasonable assumption that the incident was at least partially as a result of the area's bad weather. The climate in Iceland is erratic. The most accepted explanation says that the pilot switched to the incorrect fuel tank while busy with technical and meteorological issues, causing the aircraft to quickly run out of fuel. On November 21, 1973, the captain, James Wick, and co-pilot Gregory Fletcher were trapped in a storm and had to deal with thick fog and snow. The aircraft's engine soon stopped running, and they started to lose elevation. The pilots chose to make an emergency landing at sea. But after they were able to get above the thick fog, they realized they were flying over a region that resembled the moon. They were gazing at Solamander Beach. The pilots were compelled to make an emergency landing on the southern coast, utilizing the beach as a runway instead of making the intended sea landing. 18 feet from the ocean, the aircraft came to a stop. On board were 5 crew members. Luckily, everyone made it through alive. They left with urgency since they were genuinely concerned the plane would catch on fire due to the fuel tanks being damaged in the crash. They were able to escape with a few items, including a first aid bag and an old radio. The downed plane was not recovered by the U.S. Navy. Instead, they just took everything expensive or helpful away from the accident scene, leaving only the empty aircraft, which eventually rusted away on the Icelandic shore. The plane was used in a variety of ways by locals after it was abandoned. There are rumors that one farmer dismantled the entire tail portion and sold it, while another might have used it for storage. It also served as target practice, as demonstrated by the abundance of bullet holes in the metal. All that's left of the Douglas C-117 today are the nose, a portion of the fuselage, and half of each of the 2 wings thanks to deterioration over time and illegal usage. A length of soft sand provides access to the site. Initially, because the place was so isolated, many tourist vehicles became trapped here and had to wait hours for help. Impolite motorists frequently caused harm to the nearby plants as they visited the location. As a result, it was decided to restrict cars from traveling along that section of land, and a parking lot was built 2.5 miles away from the crash. Now, the only way to get to Solamander Beach is on foot. The 2-hour hike is worth it to some. Number 2. AlAwliya Scrapyard. Despite being only 12 miles away from Doha, the scrapyard in AlAwliya could not be more diverse. As you turn southwest after leaving the brilliant city, you can find a desert that is nothing like its picturesque dunes. It simply has its own special kind of charm. The enormous scrapyard holds up to 20,000 vehicles at once, including jeeps, trucks, buses, excavators, loaders, bulldozers, cranes, and more. In addition, almost any type of vehicle you could imagine is available, including motorbikes, boats, water scooters, and sand buggies. These cars could be modern, vintage, classic, or antiques. They could be in perfect condition or have minor dents, abandoned, totally or partially destroyed, or even severely burned. Going through the rows of cars coated in dust is reminiscent of a post-apocalyptic scenario. The notion that each car was once prized and possibly even beloved, but is now gathering dust while waiting to be resurrected, is something certainly that has its allure. You can't help but pause and appreciate. Attempts are made to get in touch with the vehicle's owner during a typical 4-month stay. If no one comes forward with a claim, the cars are often destroyed and compacted to be recycled and reused, typically for building purposes. The yard has a separate area for vintage cars, which don't often go through this process. Instead, they're auctioned off to the highest bidders once every year. Number 1. Abandoned Muscle Car Collection. A passionate car collector hit the jackpot in the early 1980s. He filled a barn with multiple Ford Mustangs, Chevy Camaros, Mercury Cougars, and other vintage American vehicles. Unfortunately, things didn't turn out that great, and the lottery winner wasn't able to continue enjoying his collection of vehicles. Despite his large winnings from the lottery, he had reportedly filed for bankruptcy. And the cars had just been sitting, abandoned in a barn, gathering dust for nearly 40 years. The collection would have been worth millions if the vintage American vehicles, including a number of Mustangs, had stayed in somewhat decent shape. But everything is now run down and deteriorating, and in certain cases, they've been vandalized. For example, several of the cars have had their windows smashed, been covered with graffiti, or just punched in with dents. It's possible to save a few vehicles, but they're still only worth a fraction of what they would have been in excellent condition. A Mercury Cougar that could possibly be from the 1987 to 88 period is one of the vehicles found in the lottery winner's barn. Also present is a 1980 Camaro, which had its original owner's manual tucked away inside the glove compartment. Far back in the corner is a first-generation Ford Falcon from the 1960s. Since the car has unbroken glass and shows no indications of corrosion anywhere, it has a good chance of being saved and sold. But in a nearby room, a tragic scene awaits passionate Mustang lovers. A highly desired Fox body Mustang, which seems older than the 87 model, has seen better days. Simply put, it's in awful condition. Two 1960s Mustangs sit among the collection, with the majority of their components missing entirely. In the center of the room, an early Chevrolet Caprice wagon from the 1980s stands in misery, and a Cadillac Seville from the early 1980s, sitting against a wall, looks as if it needs to be shipped to the graveyard. Another Fox body vehicle, a 1960 Mercury Capri, a second Mustang, and a Ford Galaxy convertible from the 1960s, all in quite bad shape, were also seen. This barn has a truly astounding number of Mustangs. Regrettably, none of them received the amount of travel time they should have. Fans and connoisseurs should have been able to see and adore these cars during peak condition. In the front of the room, next to the Cougar and in front of the Camaro, is the worst of the bunch, a 1960s Ford Mustang convertible. The car was extremely harsh both inside and out because it had no roof over the cabin. Ironically, it has a sticker on its bumper that reads, "Let the good times roll." That hasn't happened in quite a while though, and it doesn't seem like it will anytime soon, based on how the lotto winner abandoned the cars. Do you know of any abandoned vehicles with a good story? We'd love to hear from you. Let us know down in the comments. Before you go, hit that like and subscribe button. See you soon.